Candace and controversy is like Kim Kardashian and a sex tape, right? It's their bread and butter. Hey guys, I'm Hannah Cox with Base Politics, and you're watching the Base Politics Show. Welcome back. If you like these videos, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube, or make sure to head over to Apple iTunes if you're listening on audio and leave a 5-star review. I'd love to read some of your comments. Since becoming more active in politics, I have mostly kept an attitude of trying my best to be friends with as many people as I can. And the reason for that is strategic, and I also think it is how I keep my mental sanity as a whole working in this field. Obviously, there are many, many people in politics that I have very intense disagreements with, but I refuse to buy into the mentality that the vast majority of people, just because they have opposite ideas than mine, are bad people. And genuinely, after having worked in this industry for about 10 years at this point, I really have not been proven wrong all that often. I have so many friends on both the far left and the far right that I genuinely enjoy, that I find mentally stimulating, that I love to have debates and conversations with. And as a whole, even when our solutions on how to fix the most pressing problems in society differ vastly, I find in general that people come from a good place. I don't think the vast majority of people have bad intentions. I don't think that they're really motivated by greed or power. Yes, there are those types in politics, but there are a whole lot more people in this industry that have rose-colored glasses on, that are super optimistic, that care deeply about this country, and that are so genuine in their desire to improve life around them. Because of this viewpoint, I try my best to handle disagreements I have with people privately. I try to always assume the best of intentions. And for the most part, I try to keep my door open to working with people who I disagree with on many issues, because more likely than not, there's at least one or two things you can come together on. And I think this is how you can tell the difference of people in politics who are effective versus not. Because people who are actually effective, and by effective, I mean they actually get bills passed, they have real impact on the political decisions being made around them. Those people know that it takes really big coalitions to get anything done. You can grandstand and pop off all you want over here and throw red meat left and right. And yes, it will probably build you an audience and more than likely make you a pretty penny. But what it won't do is help you get policies across the finish line. As someone who's in this business because I too genuinely care about improving the world around me, and I therefore care a lot about the impact of my work and my ability to impact public policy, so I have to be able to work well with others. And that's why I've been able to get a number of very big policies passed over the past couple of years. But today, I have to make an exception. I think I've stayed quiet on this situation for long enough. There are a growing number of people operating in what I would call the grifter class of politics. And by that, I mean people who have zero concern about the actual implications of what they say or do. I mean people that are completely unmoored from any set of actual principles or cohesive ideologies. They are people that have absolutely no strategy. And if they did have an idea of something they wanted to see change, they've got no real experience working in the political field and therefore no earthly idea of what it takes to actually get things done. And they are largely people who are very good at building social media followings, very good at creating controversy and getting eyeballs on what they say. And again, they typically make quite a bit of money doing this. And that's because, unfortunately, as I've said ad nauseum, and I'll keep saying, so many Americans are completely uneducated about the system around them. And not only does that mean that they are very easily led astray when it comes to good ideas on public policies or even like what's aligned with the values that they think they hold, it also means they're very bad at recognizing charlatans and grifters when they present. This is the reason our founding fathers said that this experiment could only work with an educated population. Because as a whole, the incentives when it comes to media and social media and a lot of the things that really pertain very closely to grassroots activism these days, they're driven by the market. And so when you have people that are operating in these spaces, they are going to continue producing content that makes them more money, that gets them more followers. And that is their ultimate end goal. When you have an uneducated population, the incentives are going to be for people to move further and further into the extremes, to the far left, to the far right. They're going to be for people who are entertaining versus intellectually stimulating. And it creates a cycle of audience capture where you will see people in the public eye continue to become more and more unhinged over time as they keep trying to satiate those incentives. It's one reason if you go and scroll through the comment section on the New York Times podcast, you will see absolutely insane comments from people claiming that the New York Times has gone alt-right, that they simp for Trump, that they're too critical of Biden. Now, that sounds absolutely insane to anybody on the right who's reading the New York Times and who thinks that they are completely left-wing shills and simp for the government and push people like Biden. But my point being that each of these groups are very deep into their echo chambers, and there's not a lot of education to understand what's actually being said. There's not a lot of media literacy to actually process what they're being fed. And so you've got people on the left that think that about the New York Times, and you've got people on the right that think people like Candace Owens are intellectuals, think that they are effective at building coalitions or winning new voices to their cause. And as a whole, this whole cycle is extremely damaging to our political system because it pushes people further and further again into the extremes, into their echo chambers. They're being fed a diet of media that is completely made up, that is fabricated, that is based on conspiracies, and that often has very sinister underpinnings that they are not able to comprehend when they are consuming it. Recently, I was doing a debate on gun control that I hope comes out soon. And afterwards, I was talking to some of the people, both on my team and on the opposite side of the aisle. And they said, in a meaning to be complimentary way, "You are so smart. You are so in depth on public policy. I'm so glad you were on my team. You're like Charlie Kirk." And I was like, "Oh, I know you meant that as a compliment, but I can't think of a bigger slap in the face." Because I do not think people like Charlie Kirk or Candace Owens are intellectuals or smart whatsoever. I think they're grifters. I think they are out for their own profit. And I think as a whole, many of the things they say are very damaging. They turn the vast majority of people off. And as a whole, they are a big part of the reason that the right is swiftly losing popularity in very important demographics in this country. And if you think that doesn't matter, again, you're not really a strategic or effective person. You have to be able to win people to your cause. Now, the extent to which the right is still even centered around causes like free market capitalism or limited government or individual liberty, I think is highly debatable. But they are certainly still centralized around those principles more than the left. And so if the right is consistently turning people off because of grifters like this, at the end of the day, what that means is people who truly hold to these principles and these values have no camp. They have no tribe. And they also have no ability to meaningfully attract new people to their ideas. So for that reason, today I want to actually address recent comments that Candace Owens has made that I think are despicable. And I want to do that because I want anybody in my audience who is still falling prey to these grifters to have a wake-up call. Because what I'm about to play for you is by no means an outlier for this woman's career. In fact, this is the very substance on which she has built her identity and brand. Candace has always been a quack, right? From as far back as the time she first entered the public conscious. And if you didn't know that, you need to know it. And you need to step back and actually examine the discernment that you have when approaching public policy and political matters. Because these are serious matters. You have a very big responsibility to participate in the system around you. And that means you have a responsibility to be educated. That means you have a responsibility to show some discernment. That means you have a responsibility to ensure that people you are elevating in your movement are authentic and have good goals. As one of my heroes, Frederic Bastiat, said, the worst thing that can happen to a good cause is not to be skillfully attacked, but to be ineptly defended. And that's what is happening right now en masse on the right. You've got a whole lot of people in this grifter class that have infiltrated liberty spaces and that are ruining them with their poison. First, let's roll these recent comments Candace made on her show.
On innocent people. Candace, come on, that's the difference. They experimented on twins. I mean, some of the stories, by the way, sound completely absurd. I'm like the idea that they just like cut a human up and then sewed them back together. Why would you do that? Literally, even if you're the most evil person in the world, that's a tremendous waste of time and supplies. Just slice a person in half and sew them together. That just sounds like bizarre propaganda.
Now, to be clear, what you're hearing here is Candace questioning very well documented practices and horrific experimentations that went down during the Holocaust. Commonly, this would be referred to as Holocaust denialism, which is, of course, a theory steeped in anti-Semitism. Now, needless to say, there was tremendous backlash against Candace for these comments, which she likes, right? This is something she does on purpose. She's somebody who wants to get eyeballs no matter what. She wants to get clicks. She wants outrage. She wants commentary about her. And that's another reason I have refrained from commenting on her for the vast majority of my career, because it feeds into her end goal. Candace and controversy is like Kim Kardashian and a sex tape, right? It's their bread and butter. But at some point, I think people do have to rise up and call things out. These comments are atrocious. And so I do think there is a need to highlight them. And not just highlight them, but highlight them with an informed understanding of what came before them when it comes to Candace Owens. So let's do a quick recap. Now, anybody who's followed Candace for some time knows that she has been very incendiary, at the very least, towards Black people. A humongous part of her brand has been being a Black woman who calls out Black people. And this plays very, very well to many on the far right who would love nothing more than to openly say the things about Black people that Candace does. But they can't get away with saying some of these things because they would be called racist. Therefore, they love Candace because she can say what they want to and get away with it. It's as simple as that. Now, what's interesting to me about her brand is that she's always tried to act as if she was somebody who was able to reach the Black community and convince them to give up on the left. She has this whole movement called Blexit that is supposedly reaching all kinds of Black people and getting them to give up on the DNC. And it's utterly ridiculous. I can't think of somebody that Black America hates more as a public pundit than Candace Owens. And not only do they hate her because of the awful and atrocious things she's often said about Black people, they also have no relationship with her. And I think this is something conservatives have got to get through their mind. They are so easily played out in these scenarios. They often have such a it's a pick me mentality. I don't know how else to describe it. They are so excited when anybody who does not fit the typical demographic says that they are conservative. It could be a D-list celebrity. It could be somebody who has a small following in evangelical circles. It can be a Black person. It could be a woman. If you come to the right and you're one of these demographics that they know they are notorious for not attracting, and you say, hey, I'm one of you, they will flock to these kinds of people because they are so desperate to look like they have this kind of inclusivity or that they have diversity in their ranks. And to be clear, I think that's a good thing. I think that if we want to keep free market capitalism and limited government and individual liberty as values, then we absolutely do need to be doing outreach to demographics that do not typically associate with the right. But the way to do that is not to platform and elevate tokens, particularly when those tokens are anti the very communities that you think they are going to reach. Instead, the way to do that is to actually do the ground game, right? To actually go into those communities, to do the hard work of forming relationships and education and actually trying to involve different people into your causes. And secondarily, the way to do that is to not have as representatives of your movement people that are openly racist and bigoted. That's the hump you're already trying to overcome. So platforming somebody like Candace Owens and promoting her is not only not going to attract Black people to your movement, it's going to make them run further in the opposite direction. I cannot wrap my mind around why that is not just an obvious fact to anybody who consumes her content. But while Candace has been very openly anti-Black for many, many years, her recent fall from grace with the Daily Wire seems to have really taken the lid off the can when it comes to her disdain for Jewish people. Now, when this beef first started to really kick up dust between Candace and Ben Shapiro at the Daily Wire, there were many who tried to boil it down to simply be an anti-war or America first, because a lot of it really kicked into high gear after Israel was attacked by a terrorist attack driven by Hamas back in October, and then began retaliating against the Palestinian people after that. Ben Shapiro is very openly a Zionist. He's very pro-Israel. I'd say he's Israel first. And I can't stand Ben Shapiro's takes on wars. I think they're absolutely trash. There's nothing limited government about them. There's nothing individual liberty about them. There's nothing that is actually humanist about them. But that being said, I felt very strongly that while I am very against Israel's actions over the past couple of months, you had to be very careful when it came to these conversations and slow to align with people who spoke out against Israel. Because unlike in other conflicts like Ukraine and Russia, I do think there is a secondary motivation for many of the people who are against Israel and what it's doing. I am against Israel and what they're doing because I think it's genocidal, because I think it's inhumane, because I do not believe in war. I certainly don't believe in the US participating in wars that don't pertain to us. But I can believe all of those things while still loving Jewish people, supporting Jewish people, and without getting into bigoted territory. And I think that should be a perfectly sane line to be able to toe. The fact that it isn't for many people is telling, and what it tells is that many people are also driven by anti-Semitism and a hatred of Israel and a hatred of Jewish people. And for me, with Candace, when she opposed Israel, it seemed very obvious that she was coming from the latter point of view. And I say that because of her history, which I'm going to get more into. But as a side note, I want to point out too that people like Ben Shapiro and other people in the Israel First camp massively overplayed their hands in this conversation, because they tried to label absolutely anybody who spoke out against Israel or who even spoke out against anti-free speech bills that Congress was trying to pass, saying that you couldn't criticize Israel or you couldn't be anti-Zionist without being anti-Semitic. People like Thomas Massey and myself, they also tried to label us as anti-Semitic. I made a whole video responding to this because quacks like Bethany Mandel and Cassie Dillon and Ben Shapiro all tried to come for my throat when I stood up for free speech and pushed back against Israel's war, even though I did so from a very pro-Jewish people stance, and at the time was even exploring a conversion to Judaism. I'll put a link to that full video if you want to dig into that whole scenario and my response. But as I said then, these people would be like the boy who cried wolf, because when they tried to smear absolutely anybody who was anti-war as being anti-Semitic, they made it impossible to actually identify real wolves in their midst, which I think Candace Owens absolutely is. So let's examine some of the receipts for what I think truly motivates Candace in this discussion. First and foremost, I want to remind you of Candace's vehement defense of Kanye West, as he very overtly dipped into anti-Semitism in a very public display over the past couple of years, leading to him losing tons of followers, getting blocked online, and also losing major sponsorships. This is an article from the Jerusalem Post. They say conservative political commentator Candace Owens dismissed the charges that Kanye West was anti-Semitic in a recent tweet stating that he would go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people. Owens said that West's statement was not actually demonizing Jewish people. Ma'am, what? He said he was going to go DEFCON 3 on all Jewish people. She said, if you are an honest person, you did not think this tweet was anti-Semitic. You did not think that he wrote this tweet because he hates or wants to genocide Jewish people. This is not the beginning of a Holocaust. No, Candace, the vast majority of honest people looked at that tweet and knew exactly what he meant. He didn't exactly mince words. Not only has she defended Kanye, who's been overtly anti-Semitic, she's also defended Hitler himself. Let's roll that clip.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German, everybody to look a different way. That's not, to me, that's not nationalism. In thinking about how it could go bad down the line, I don't really have an issue with nationalism. I really don't. I think that it's okay. It's important to retain your country's identity and to make sure that what's happening here, which I think is incredibly worrisome in terms of the decrease in the birth rate that we're seeing in the UK, is what you kind of want to avoid. So I don't have I have no problems with nationalism. It's globalism that I try to avoid.
Oof, let's dissect that. Every single credible person I knew who had been giving Candace the benefit of the doubt for way too long, in my opinion, when this clip came out, was done. And anybody who was not done at that point, you need to feel bad. You need to seriously examine your discernment, and you probably need to take a step back from politics for a little bit until you're more equipped. Because what she said in that clip is not only heinous, it's also bonkers. She's basically saying that the mass incarceration, the government's theft of property, and genocide within your own borders is A-okay. Sweetheart, the problem with Hitler is not that he didn't just keep it in his own pants, keep it in his own borders. It's not just that he wanted to take his views elsewhere and impose them on other countries. His views were disgusting on base and directly tied to nationalism. Racism and xenophobia are directly tied to nationalism. You cannot separate them. They are one and the same. They are the logical conclusion of that ideology. Nationalism is bad. And this is another concept that the right has got to actually learn definitions for. Because so many people, when I say nationalism is bad, they give me this look. Well, don't you just love your country? I just support my country. I'm just patriotic. That's great. Patriotism is being proud of your country, celebrating your country, defending your country, working for your country, serving for your country, loving the people who are around you. That's patriotism. Nationalism is not one and the same with patriotism. Nationalism is a very well defined ideology that pertains to economics and that pertains to how you view people. Nationalism believes that if you were born within these imaginary lines in this country, your life is worth more, is more valuable, you are a better person than people born over here, right? It's all about trying to strengthen those borders around these people because you believe that these people are worth more than those people. That's why she immediately starts talking about the need for us to have more births, right? What she's saying is she wants white people, Western people, to have more babies. And this is very, very common amongst these types, right? It's not that they just want more people, because if so, immigration would be the obvious solution. They don't want immigration. They don't want those people. They want certain people with certain traits, okay? It is inherently tied to ethnicity. And that's why her type often dabbles in things like the great replacement theory, okay? They are obsessed with where the babies are coming from. Secondarily, nationalism says that because we believe these people are better, we only want to benefit them. So we want to cut off ties to other countries, right? We want to disadvantage other countries while prioritizing ours. And that part is just economically illiterate and stupid. It's anti-capitalist, okay? And I think this is another thing where people get all worked up over globalism. Obviously, if we're talking about globalism in the context of things like the United Nations, that's bad. We don't want to set up a world order where other countries have more of a say over our lives than we ourselves do. But historically, what globalism has actually meant is freedom. It's capitalism. It's the free exchange of goods and services. It's free trade. It's the very basics of free market economics. If you don't understand these mechanisms, I encourage you to read the very short book I Pencil. It's available for free at fee.org, where I used to work. It is a great, easy book to help you understand why globalism is a good thing. And it helps us produce things more efficiently. It helps bring the cost of items down. It creates prosperity. Nationalists don't care about that because one, they're economically illiterate, and two, because again, their main goal is not to lift all boats. It's not to create as much prosperity and wealth as possible. Their main goal is to advantage the people they like over the people they dislike. And so they do very economically stupid things to that end. And as a whole, they end up making everybody's life worse off because anti-capitalism always creates worse outcomes than capitalism. And that's why you see the dominant faces and leaders of nationalism in the US, which has really just kind of started to gain steam since 2016. They tend to be very anti immigrant people and often openly racist and bigoted people, people like Nick Fuentes, who is this like grimy little troll that looks like he crawled out of a cave last week, but he has all these like weird men that follow him. And in saying that, I'm sure they're going to pop up in my comments, so you'll get to see them in the wild. I mean, not really in the wild, because I'm pretty sure they don't leave their mom's basements, but like in the wild in the comment section. Which, speaking of Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens actually also has ties to him. According to this report by Media Matters, Candace Owens has been singling out Jewish people for attack in recent weeks. She recently liked a post that asked a rabbi she is feuding with whether he is drunk on Christian blood again. She also has said that there is a Jewish gang in Hollywood committing horrific things, suggested Jews are going to be blamed if TikTok is banned, and railed against DC Jews and rot in the Jewish community. This is part of a long-standing pattern from Owens. She previously defended her friend, the rapper Kanye West, after he posted he would go DEFCON 3 on Jewish people, saying, if you're an honest person, you did not think this tweet was anti-Semitic. In 2019, she said, if Hitler just wanted to debate in Germany, great, and have things run well, okay, fine. I have no problems with nationalism. Owens' recent commentary has caught the attention of notorious anti-Semite Nick Fuentes, who said on his show that she has been in a full-fledged war against the Jews. Fuentes is a white supremacist leader who attended the deadly 2017 Unite the Right white supremacist rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, called for a white uprising to install Trump as a dictator, and has generated a lengthy list of bigoted statements, including his recent exhortation of Jews to get the F out of America. He is also a Holocaust denier. Shocker. For those of you on video, here's a screenshot from a recent episode he made on Rumble discussing Candace Owens. In it, he said, love it. This is the face of total Jewish defeat. She won. I love that. I love how all the Jews have to watch this show. This is the face, dude. No, no, no. But this is the face of a total Jewish defeat. We have to stand. Go off, girly. We effing got your back, Candace. Eat them up. Eat them up. They're filth. Now, not only are Candace and Nick Fuentes apparently cozy, Nick Fuentes is also very cozy with Kanye West, who, again, Candace will defend with her life. During an appearance on conspiracy theorist Alex Jones' show InfoWars alongside white nationalist Nick Fuentes, West, who legally changed his name to Ye, praised Hitler and denigrated Jewish people and Israel. The musician and fashion designer 45 said that he liked Hitler and that nobody knew the meaning of anti-Semitism until he started sharing conspiracy theories about Jewish people this year. They did good things too, West said during the interview, which has sparked widespread backlash. We've got to stop dissing Nazis all the time. Now, obviously, again, Kanye West caught a lot of heat for these remarks. Even Alex Jones, kook that he is, cut as soon as Kanye said that and tried his best to push back. I mean, if Alex Jones is trying to distance himself for you, if what you're saying is too crazy for him, you've crossed a line. But while it seemed to be a line too far for Alex Jones, it wasn't for Candace, who continued to defend Kanye West. She took to Parler and said anybody correlating Ye to Adolf Hitler should no longer be taken seriously as a commentator, politician, or journalist anymore, just an absolute joke. Now, at this point, you might be asking yourself, why does Candace go so hard in the paint for Kanye West? And the answer for that is simple. She would be an absolute nobody without Kanye West, right? She's not very smart. She's not very interesting. All she can do is just light little fires and watch them burn. But she caught the attention of Kanye West a number of years ago. And given his comments, it's not too hard to see why she caught his attention. And he tweeted about her at the time, saying that he liked the way Candace Owens thought. And since this was before Kanye West exposed himself as a total quack, the tweet went viral, it got Candace all kinds of national attention, and it fully launched her brand. It's also worth knowing that at the time she wrote this, her husband, George Farmer, was the CEO of Parler, and she made the comments days after it was announced that West was set to acquire the social media platform. Now, that deal didn't ultimately go through, but I think it does speak to her motivations, which again seem to always be her own bank account. Now, again, it's important to know that all of this transpired before she ultimately left, was pushed out, was fired. Who could really say? Before her relationship with the Daily Wire came to a close. But it seems like the current Israel-Palestine conflict kicked things into high gear, and more of her true feelings around Jews continued to seep out. In November of 2023, she wrote, "No government anywhere has a right to commit genocide ever. There is no justification for a genocide. I can't believe this even needs to be said or is even considered the least bit controversial to state." Now, this blew up at the time because there are still people who argue what Israel is doing is not genocide, which I find very questionable. But regardless, she got a lot of heat for it on the right, and she quickly clarified that she wasn't necessarily talking about Israel, which I think that's so weak in the knees. If you're going to take a stance, stay it with your whole chest. Secondarily, if you're going to stand against genocide, you've got to do it at all times, which I'm pretty sure she doesn't, for reasons we'll continue to get into. She continued to make a lot of incendiary remarks around Israel and Jewish people for several months, and it definitely got the attention of Ben Shapiro, who is the co-founder of the Daily Wire where she was working. On November 14th, he said this about her.
Yes, the question was about Candace Owens. I think her behavior during this has been disgraceful. Without a doubt. I think it's absolutely I can't, what was that? Yeah, I mean, she still works for my company. And I think she's been absolutely disgraceful. I think that her faux sophistication on these particular issues has been ridiculous. It's not faux sophistication, it's ridiculous. Everybody can see the moves that she's making and the things that she's saying, and I find them disreputable.
Now, I'll say this about Ben Shapiro. I often do disagree with him, but I respect him more than the vast majority of people at the Daily Wire. I think he actually does hold an ideology, again, one that I often disagree with, especially for his stance on Israel and war in general. But he has a true ideology, right? He's got some kind of guiding principles that are bigger than him and they're bigger than his bank account. And I also think he is a smart person, right? I have to respect people who actually have intellectualism, who research things before they pop off. I don't think he's somebody who says things just to get clicks and attention. So I can disagree with him, as I talked about at the beginning of this episode, in a respectful way. And I think his criticisms of Candace were 100% correct. Even though when it comes to the actual issues of the war, I was against Ben's stance and myself also was opposed to how Israel was behaving. Here's a quick breakdown of what else transpired before she ended up parting ways with the Daily Wire. She posted a series of Bible verses, including one that said you cannot serve both God and money, which is kind of a wink at a lot of anti-Semitic theories that try to claim Jewish people control all of the money. And so therefore what Candace was trying to say is that you have to be able to speak out against the Jewish people, even though they control the money. And if you don't do so, if you're not anti-Israel, it's just because you're getting paid by the Jewish people. Shapiro responded to that post, telling her that if taking money from the Daily Wire somehow comes between you and God, by all means quit. Minutes later, Owens accused Shapiro of acting unprofessional and emotionally unhinged for weeks and called him utterly out of line for suggesting that I cannot quote biblical scripture. Now, obviously, anybody can quote biblical scripture, but when you do so sparingly and only in these kinds of contexts and people read between the lines, you can't get all upset and say you were just quoting scripture when you're very obviously using scripture disingenuously to passive aggressively make a point. And so that brings you up to present day and this recent clip where she is now outright denying aspects of the Holocaust. As I said, she received a ton of criticism and backlash for this clip. Andrew Lawton said, any day now, Candace Owens will be talking about how Jews might have just been tattooing numbers on themselves. And as the backlash grew, Candace and her team basically tried to spin it and say that this had been clipped disingenuously from her full show. Again, I think she even went as far as to blame Zionist and Jewish people for doing that to make her look bad. But actually, the more you watch of this episode, the worse it gets. Let's roll this clip.
In this case is Germany, Nazi, Hitler, the greatest evil that's ever happened on earth, even though factually and statistically it is not. And part of that learning process for me when I started looking into it was coming across a huge fact that we ethnically, the Allies, ethnically cleansed 12 million Germans. Because when you say to people, okay, what is it about Hitler? Why is he the most evil? Well, the first thing people would say is, well, an ethnic cleansing almost took place. And now I offer back, you mean like we actually did?
As Richie Torres said in response to this video clip, in the Candace Owens fictional account of World War II, the real victims were not the Jews, but the Germans, the real villains, not the Axis, but the Allies. She downplays the Holocaust while accusing the US and its allies of ethnically cleansing Germans. Those harboring hate in their heart can either be ignorant or malevolent. Candace Owens is both ignorant and malevolent, both stupid and sinister. As I said, if you were going to always stand against genocide, then you would especially stand against the worst genocide in recent memory, which is what the Germans did to the Jewish people. You would be vehemently against Hitler. And if you were going to oppose Israel's actions today, you would do so in the context of criticizing a government versus the people underneath it. She has in no way tried to actually straddle that fence, right? She's jumped far off on the other side. And to me, it is very, very clear that she is against Israel's actions because she is against Jewish people in general. I think oftentimes for people who are not working day in and day out in media or politics as I am, they either are unaware of some of these conversations that come up, or they're very quick to prevent controversies because the media cycle feeds us one after the next after the next. But as a quick recap, I found this on Twitter. In just the last few months, Candace Owens has either said or insinuated that 1, Israel was involved with 9/11, the earth may be flat, which Brad covered on his show. If you didn't see that, go over to his channel and check it out. She said it's absurd to believe dinosaurs roamed the earth and were killed by an asteroid. She has suggested that Macron, the president in France, that his wife is secretly a man. She has said Jews were behind the Bolshevik Revolution. It was secretly a genocide targeting Christians that was worse than the Holocaust. She has said the Holocaust is either fake or severely exaggerated. She has said the crimes of the Allies in World War II and post-World War II were worse than anything the Nazis did. She has said the deportation of ethnic Germans from the rest of Europe post-World War II was worse than the Holocaust. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. This girl's cracked. And whether or not she is genuinely cracked in the head or just saying this to increase her own bottom line, I'm not sure which one's worse. But either way, if you are still listening to her, like something is seriously off. Richard Hanania said, Candace Owens doesn't love Hitler. She just wants you to know that all the criticisms of him are exaggerated. Definitely no sinister agenda there. She's just a stickler for historical accuracy. She's not a stickler for accuracy at all. She spews more hot garbage than almost anybody else I can think of. My friend Ian Hayworth said, as Candace Owens continues to prove exactly who and what she is, the silence from those who ignored or defended her obvious anti-Semitism is deafening. Yes, it is. Okay. Maybe you were in the dark. Maybe you weren't paying very close attention. Maybe when others have spoken out against Candace, which has been happening en masse for years, you didn't pay attention. But at this point, given this history, this body of work, if you're still over here rocking with this chick, something is deeply off. Ian went on to say, Candace Owens can't stand alone because she doesn't actually know or believe anything. Despite this, she's made millions leveraging right-wing identity politics to attach herself to other people's ideas before wildly spewing their talking points. She was a leftist until she could make more money being a conservative. She was pro-Trump until she could make more money being anti-Trump, and until she could make even more money being pro-Trump again. She was pro-Israel until she could make more money being anti-Israel. But as her grift gets old, her opinions shrink, and she has to look for a new host. She tried to attach herself to Tucker Carlson, but that didn't work because he's actually talented and smart. So what's her next target? Nick Fuentes and the online anti-Semite crowd. Her routine is transparent and yet hugely lucrative, so why would she change? It's challenging to know how to deal with her comments because her entire business model is to spark outrage or conflict by partnering contrarianism with late-night Googling, fast talking, and stunning ignorance. By pushing back, we often give her exactly what she craves. I call everyone on their bullshit, left, right, and center, but because attention is all Candace Owens wants, and she provides insane nonsense on a daily basis as outrage bait, I try to pick my moments. But when she's pushing bullshit like Holocaust denial, we have to push back because this isn't about a grifting fraud anymore. It's about fighting against a fundamental pillar of modern anti-Semitism that is on the rampage across the world. Conservatives have got to get past this pick-me mentality and actually vet people and show some discernment before elevating them in their movement and making them the face of it. And I would argue a lot of damage has already been irreparably done by their association with this woman. The only thing they can do now is to try to actually put in place some accountability for the absolute crazy things she's saying and to distance themselves from her. Those media incentives I talked about at the beginning of the episode, they trace back to you, the consumer, right? You have to be better than clicking into this kind of stuff. You have to be better than tuning in, giving it attention, following it, liking it, because that's the only thing that means anything to these kinds of people, right? They don't have any morality. They don't have any principles. They just care about their bottom line. And until they stop being able to profit off these kinds of grifts, it will continue and probably worsen. And I will say to those in the Israel First Zionist camp, again, you need to really examine some of your choices and conversations that you've had over the past couple of months. Because many of you have spent a lot of time demonizing good people who love Jewish people and who will defend them, but who are against war and who are against Israel's obviously bad actions. And because you have chosen to do that, there are fewer and fewer people who are willing to stick their neck out and stand up for you when it really matters. And additionally, you're going to have a whole lot harder time actually getting people to fight back against the wolf in your midst when it does rear its ugly head. All right, guys, I want to move on to a topic that I so badly wanted to cover with you the minute it was happening, but unfortunately, given the fact that it happened right before a holiday weekend, and again, given the fact that I am operating with a nonprofit budget, I just couldn't get to it. And for those of you who are often leaving me so many great comments, right? I've had so many requests for great ideas, great topics, great kinds of shows I'd love to produce. I just want to remind you, Base Politics is a nonprofit. We use the funds that we are given solely to create this kind of content, to create more of it, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of research. It takes a lot of time to film and record. And it also takes a ton of time to edit, to schedule, to promote it. The more funds we have for more video editors and people who can help to expedite that process and create more content, the more ground we can cover. So if you care about the work that we're doing, if you believe in it, if you want to see more of it, make sure you head over to the Base Politics website and donate. You can also reach out to myself or Brad if you'd like more information, because this is the kind of topic that's really timely when it hits and that I'd love to be able to just jump on and cover at the very moment it's breaking, but we just don't have that bandwidth right now and probably won't till we have a larger staff. So for the record, I have been anticipating this decision for probably 3 or 4 years. I've written about it in the past. I've discussed how important it could be. And it's not just me. Pretty much everybody who works in like the wonky liberty space, like we have been foaming at the mouth, waiting for this to happen. And it pertains to something called the Chevron Doctrine, which by now you've probably seen. It was overturned by the Supreme Court a couple of weeks ago. At the time when the decision came down the pipeline, all I could do was hop on TikTok and make a quick video dissecting why this was so important. That video went totally viral, okay? It has millions and millions of views across multiple platforms. The unfortunate thing is there was no way to repackage it for YouTube because the dimensions are different. So a 9:16 video was perfectly capable of being spread across every other platform, but on YouTube, it wasn't the right sizing, and I just didn't have the time or ability or assistance to repackage it for YouTube or to make alternative content. So that is why I'm circling back to this a little bit late for you on YouTube and podcast, but I think it's important to do so because this is a monumental decision. We get so few wins these days. We get so few pieces of truly good news that it's worth celebrating this kind of thing massively when it happens. And secondarily, naturally, there has been so much fake news and propaganda around this decision and what it means from the left that I think it's really important to make sure everybody in my audience across multiple platforms gets a solid understanding of what went down. So let's refresh. I'm going to roll my TikTok video that took off, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit more deeply. While all you normies are focused on the debate and the election question from last night, something far more consequential just went down today thanks to the Supreme Court. Stick with me. I'm going to explain how a group of fishermen just took down the fourth branch of government and restored the Constitution. Okay, so in 1984, you had a bunch of judges at the time who were what we call judicial activists, meaning that they are not really restrained to interpretations of the law based on the Constitution or originalism, or even based on like stare decisis, which means precedent that's come before. Instead, they just tend to make up law that best suits them. So in 1984, there was a ruling known as the Chevron Doctrine. And in it, the court basically said that when Congress writes a piece of legislation giving unelected bureaucrats and government agencies power to oversee something, if there's ambiguity in that law, the agency, the bureaucrats, the experts, get to basically just decide what their own powers are. Not the courts, not Congress, the unelected bureaucrats. So needless to say, this has coincided with an absolute explosion in rules and regulations over the past several decades. To the point where I would argue Americans are no longer actually living in a representative government for a number of reasons, but predominantly because your elected lawmakers are not the ones really making most of the rules that govern your lives. Instead, it's what we call the fourth branch of government, a bunch of unelected bureaucrats and government agencies. And not only have they been given broad power to just make up powers for themselves because of the Chevron Doctrine, it's also made it really hard to check them when they do things that are unconstitutional. Because thanks to the Chevron Doctrine, which has been law of the land, if you were to try to challenge some of these rules and regulations and powers that they were giving themselves, the courts were told they had to defer to the agency. But in a case that was decided today, known as the Loper case, a group of fishermen brought a challenge to this law and they won, overturning the Chevron Doctrine. This is massive. Everybody in my movement, everybody in like libertarian conservative think tank world is freaking out. What this means is that the constitutional order that was supposed to exist is somewhat returned. Congress is supposed to make the laws. The executive is supposed to have a tiny check and balance on those laws with the veto power. And then the courts are supposed to decide what's constitutional. And if there's any ambiguity in there, it should be the courts that ultimately decide, and or it should get kicked back to Congress. Not only did Chevron allow a huge growth in the administrative state, it also allowed a huge growth in the power of the executive. And if you watched that debate last night and you're not convinced that we need to limit the government and limit the power of the executive, you are a lost cause, and you're one of the few. So because of that, the president has been able to just go to agencies and be like, hey, I can't get this law passed, but I really want to see this go down. You guys just like make up this power and go implement it. And there's been nothing we could do about it, but now we can. One thing I love about this and similar issues when they've come up is when the left loses, their whole argument is that this is a power grab. Like, no, it's actually just restoring the power to where it was supposed to be. But like, think about that for a minute. I don't know how after 2020 to 2023, people still with a serious straight face tell us we should trust the experts. But that's literally their argument. They're like, the experts in these agencies know best. And how could the courts or Congress possibly speak to all the very complicated issues they work on? That's why they have staffs, they have research fellows, they have amicus briefs, they have friends of the court. And honestly, if the government has its hands in so many issues that the people who are supposed to be governing can't have a thorough knowledge of the issues they're governing, then that again should show you that you need to limit the government. They're doing too much. There were 3 justices that voted against this, the usual suspects, Ketanji Brown Jackson, Sotomayor, and Kagan. They're like the Looney Tune far left of the court. And I want to read you from Kagan's dissent. She said, Congress often enacts regulatory laws that contain ambiguities and gaps, which agencies must then interpret. The question is, who decides of the possible readings of those laws should prevail? The court should, yours should, do your job. Roman Martinez, who was the attorney that argued the case pro bono for the fishermen who brought it, he said the court has taken a major step to preserve the separation of powers and shut down unlawful agency overreach. Going forward, judges will be charged with interpreting the law faithfully, impartially, and independently without deference to the government. This is a win for individual liberty and the Constitution. I can't emphasize enough how important this legal precedent is. And I don't know about you, but I've sure needed some light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to our political system lately. Now, just to give you a little bit more insight to the legal background, this is from the Cornell Law School. Chevron deference is referring to doctrine of judicial deference given to administrative action. It was coined after a landmark case, Chevron USA versus Natural Resources Defense Council in 1984. Just side note, isn't it so weird this happened in 1984? Anyways, in Chevron, the Supreme Court set forth a legal test as to when the court should defer to the agency's answer or interpretation, holding that such judicial deference is appropriate where the agency's answer was not unreasonable, so long as Congress had not spoken directly to the precise issue at question. Chevron was one of the most important principles in administrative law for 40 years. In June of 2024, the U.S. Supreme Court overturned the Chevron Doctrine in Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo, stating the Administrative Procedure Act requires courts to exercise their independent judgment in deciding whether an agency has acted within its statutory authority, and courts may not defer to an agency interpretation of the law simply because a statute is ambiguous. Chevron is overruled. Heck yeah. Now, as I said, this is an obviously good development. The administrative state has absolutely ballooned since this decision was put into place. As I said in the TikTok video, I would argue you no longer have very much say over what actually happens to you. The extent to which we actually live in like a constitutional republic or even a like representative democracy, I think is highly questionable for a number of reasons, but this is a major one. The vast majority of things that govern your life are no longer laws that are passed by your legislatures, people you elect. Instead, they are passed by unelected bureaucrats who you have zero recourse against, zero ability to lobby, zero ability to remove. And even thanks to Chevron, hardly any ability to sue over, right? You couldn't even sue over something being unconstitutional because of Chevron. They had to give all this deference to these rando bureaucrats, the experts, in the three-letter agency. Whether or not you like big government or despise it, you cannot disagree that this is unconstitutional. Legislators are supposed to write the laws. The executive is supposed to oversee the laws, and the judges are supposed to interpret the laws and decide whether or not they're constitutional, decide whether or not the agency is reading them correctly. That is Civics 101. And if you have a problem with that, you don't like democracy. You want mob rule. That's what you want. At least own it and say that, right? Let's look at this very disingenuous piece from the NRDC, which is a climate hack organization. It's titled The Supreme Court in Chevron Deference. What now? They say the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling today in Loper Bright Enterprises versus Raimondo dealt a severe blow to the ability of federal agencies to do their jobs. To do their jobs? To color in the lines of the explicit authority they've been given by lawmakers? Pretty sure that's their jobs. Instead of deferring to the expertise of agencies on how to interpret ambiguous language and laws pertaining to their work, federal judges now have the power to decide what a law means for themselves. They've always had the ability to decide that, you absolute walnut. That is the fundamental job of judges. As a result, despite not being accountable to the people, judges will now be able to expand their role into the realm of policymaking. Judges are absolutely accountable to the people. They are appointed typically through either the process of being elected themselves or by someone else who is elected appointing them. Like, newsflash, that's pretty much the entire reason Trump was able to win in 2016, because there were so many people on the right that despised him, but recognized how many seats were going to be up on the Supreme Court and voted accordingly. Like, I just don't know how you can be operating in the political sphere and be this uneducated on the very foundations our country was constructed around. They go on, in one fell swoop, the majority today gives itself exclusive power over every open issue, no matter how expertise-driven or policy-laden, involving the meaning of regulatory law, wrote Justice Elena Kagan in her dissent from the ruling. As if it did not have enough on its plate, the majority turns itself into the country's administrative czar. One, that's your job. That's what you get paid to do. And if you're finding that your caseload is too big, that means the government is too big and needs to reduce the scope that it's working on, okay? Secondarily, this doesn't give judges the exclusive power. Congress still has the ability to write laws and therefore should write them more precisely. They go on to say the decision has profound consequences not only for the country's rule of law, but also for how agencies, such as those protecting the public, I'm sorry, let me try again. Such as those protecting the public against everything from pollution and contaminated food to workplace hazards and rising drug prices are able to function. If you seriously think experts and these agencies have in any way meaningfully protected you from any of those things, I've got a bridge to sell you. Like, I genuinely don't know how anybody, even with one eye open for the past couple of years, can look around and think that the government has any role in public safety or that the experts even know what they're talking about when they try to meddle in these affairs. Like, they got absolutely everything wrong over the past couple of years. And moreover, the items that they're mentioning here, pollution, contaminated food, workplace hazards, drug prices, all of those things have gotten worse as the government has gotten bigger, right? You get that? Anyways, they go on to say in their trash piece, we're taught in school about how the US government's separation of powers is supposed to work. Congress writes the laws, the executive branch carries them out, and the judiciary, including the Supreme Court, resolves arguments about what these laws mean and evaluates whether they're being enforced properly. In reality, these powers overlap at times between the branches of government, and overall, the system relies on a certain degree of trust. For instance, as society, technology, and economy have grown more complex, so too has the task of governance. Because Congress is not equipped to micromanage the day-to-day administration of the legislation it passes, it must rely on federal agencies under the supervision of the president to carry out laws and policies according to their best good faith interpretations. No, it doesn't, right? If the scope has gotten too big, if it's too complicated for them to meaningfully understand what the crap they're doing when they pass laws that impact people's businesses and the economy and their daily lives, then stop. The vast majority of this, you don't have the right to be meddling in the first place. And I can't imagine the hubris it would take to argue that because Congress cannot meaningfully be educated enough to know what it's doing when it writes massive laws, despite tons of money being spent on their salaries and their staffs, despite all of the lobbyists there to weigh in, despite the research fellows they have, your argument is that they can't possibly be educated enough to know what they're doing. So therefore, we need to let these unelected, rando people with their own agenda come in and run our lives? That is asinine. But this is the common argument we have heard from people on the left after this ruling was passed. That, and they're saying that it's a power grab. It's a power grab for the Supreme Court to restore the constitutional order of checks and balances. It's a power grab for the people who live in this country to actually have some say in their representative government, and for unelected bureaucrats to not just run our lives day to day. Like, what are you talking about? I'm going to link the rest of this piece for those of you who want more background on the specific cases, both the one that created the Chevron deference and also the one that overturned it. I know I got some requests in the TikTok video for that. I don't have time to fully get into it, but I will link it if you want to get into the weeds. The last thing I want to say about this is that in the, tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands of comments I got in response to my video, a common theme emerged that I thought was really weird. I put a couple of these comments in the show notes. So one says, all the libs are crying about Project 2025 simping for the alphabet agencies. Another says, hopefully this negates bureaucratic overreach that suppresses our freedoms. The neo-libs keep squawking that it's the beginning of Prop 25. So when I first started seeing these comments, I had never heard of Project 2025 in my life. It did immediately spark a light bulb for me though. And I just had these flashbacks when I was first getting involved in politics in 2013 and 14 and 15. And you would go to these grassroots meetings and talk to conservatives in the grassroots, and they were consumed with Agenda 2021, obsessed with it. Okay. I'm pretty sure that Project 2025 is the left's version of that. So I don't have time to cover it today, but I will circle back to this next episode because I think that is going to be an interesting deep dive in and of itself. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this week. Can't wait to read your comments. Make sure to drop them on YouTube or on the review section on Apple iTunes. And until next week, stay based.